In Lalor's time, the crisis was defined by the Great Famine, and they don't come any bigger than that. But standards and expectations have changed over the years, and they've changed our perspective too. Today, we have a crisis. It is not just a financial and economic crisis, but a crisis of governance. Idealism has been replaced by cynicism and greed. Where did it all go wrong? In Lalor's time, the landlords and the ruling elite at Westminster allowed the famine to take hold and were then unable or unwilling to respond to the crisis. It was the country's smallholders who paid the terrible price. The estates were cleared by death, starvation, destitution, and assisted packages to the US and elsewhere, measly packages for the most part, to enhance the profitability of the landlord. Now the smallholders, who in today's Ireland are ordinary citizens, ourselves, are being impoverished and indeed bled dry to pay back the debts of 64 billion euros racked up by the banks and speculators, and allowed to happen by the lack of good governance, the lack of any meaningful regulation, and the lack of responsibility of the people entrusted by the nation to run the country. 64 billion euros at least. 64,000 million euros to tidy up the mess. And who have been hung out to dry in order to repay these loans? The carers, the disabled, schools, the health service, PAYE workers, pensioners, those young people who took out mortgages on overpriced property and would not be able to repay the loan in 2 lifetimes, let alone 1. And of course those thousands, hundreds of thousands of our young educated people, the lifeblood of the nation, who have been forced to emigrate to find employment. How much more austerity can we take so that the Troika and Merkel are kept inside? The German banks were responsible for flooding our economy with money to feed the greed of the banks and the speculators. They too must take their share of the blame and the pain. There is no remorse, no accountability, not even a hint of a genuine apology or a plausible explanation for their incompetence and abuse of trust from the bankers, regulators, developers, apart altogether from the politicians and their advisors who are asleep at the wheel. Just listen to the Anglo tapes to understand the thinking of corporate Ireland today. The bankers treated the regulators and the government with scorn, and the country with contempt. And what happened to these very same people who brought the country to its knees? Many have been rewarded with excessive pensions, in some cases promotions to even more lucrative jobs. And in many cases, they have been allowed to safely stash away their ill-gotten goods. How do we make those people responsible, accountable for their disgraceful activities? Well, I suppose we might start by investigating the level of hidden assets held offshore, or given to family members that knocked down prices by speculators who owe the banks tens and hundreds of millions. More importantly, where do we go from here? Well, first we must see precisely what happened in our banking system. It's quite remarkable that 5 years later, there has been no adequate inquiry into how our banks collapsed. I know one is promised, and it's certainly long overdue, but it must have the powers to hold people accountable. If there are legal blocks, these must be clear to facilitate an inquiry. In the broader picture, how do we deal with serious white-collar crime? To say the present system is unsatisfactory is an understatement. The system is a farce. We are told that our laws are not strong enough to safely convict white-collar criminals. If so, what have our lawmakers been doing over all these years to plug these glaring holes in the legislation? It certainly looks like one law for those with money and influence, and another for those at the bottom of the pile. Perhaps we can take a lesson from sport. There is little respect or cynicism for cynicism or foul play in sport. And I'm not just thinking of Joe Brolly's recent outburst on RTE. The rules apply to everybody. If you're a billionaire, a judge, a Taoiseach, doesn't matter. You're expected to play by the rules. And apart altogether from the rules, there's an unwritten code of ethics, of honesty and fair play. Of course, sport has its cheats, but they are sought out and frowned upon. And if we expect high standards, high performance and total honesty from our sports people, then why should we expect anything less from the power brokers in big business and the people who run the country? Finally, and it has been mentioned by Charles and also by Dermot, of what do we need? Perhaps it is time to step back and re-evaluate and reimagine the country and the way we are governed. The government is promising reforms, but where is the debate? We need a whole new debate on responsibility, accountability and transparency, and a debate not confined to Parliament or the council chambers, but open to all, and most of all, approached with open minds. Social solidarity, I think, is what Dermot may have called it. Despite our dreadful economic waywardness of recent years, there is a light at the end of the tunnel that has been brought about not without great pain, as we know. But it must give us hope for the future, and that sense of hope is so important. We should aim high while remaining grounded. Arrogance is a quality we do not need. We cannot afford to lose the run of ourselves again. Thank you.